Hey, let's get talking. So the question I have for you, Z, is when does a studio get big enough to not be called an indie studio?
That's a really loaded question. Um,
Because I
so
would consider you guys an indie studio.
yeah. I mean, I actually think it's not necessarily the size, but I think a lot of times is like source of funding, right?
Yeah.
And also just culture. You can
Yeah.
have like a 3-person team, and if this team is backed by venture capitalists and investors, and started by someone who's very renowned in the industry, and that might be just like a legit company and not necessarily a startup.
Right, exactly.
I've seen like there are a couple games out there that it's kind of tough to consider them as indie.
Yeah. Which ones?
So Killing Floor. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, Killing. I don't know if you heard about them. It's by a company called Tripwire Interactive. They were
Right.
like less than 10 people at one point before they made Killing Floor. They were just 100% bootstrapped, no investors. But then you look at their games and it's like holy shit, like they make some pretty crazy stuff. Same
Right.
with Aven Colony, which is developed by Paul Tozor, who's a good friend of mine. His team is 3 people, but they're making this game that looks like SimCity. And he was the AI director behind all the Metroid Prime games, and he worked at
Okay.
Rare. It's just like a lot of times, it's kind of like a thin line. So I think,
Yeah.
I think it has to do with the team culture, right? If you're
Yeah.
making a game that you really believe, versus you're making a game to try to generate your annual margins, I think that's probably what really defines what an indie is.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going through this phase where I'm getting kind of pissed off with the constant use of the term indie game. Because it's becoming more like I just scrolled through the Nintendo Switch store, and it's slowly becoming more and more loaded with indie games, which is amazing. Like that's awesome. Um, but there's like I don't know if I'm right here. I could be completely way off base, but it seems like there's way more indie games than regular games on the Switch store, and it just seems like indie games are like just normal games now. Like in the 90s you wouldn't call Super Mario an indie game, but it behaves as an indie game. Like if you play it now it feels like an indie game. So I don't know, like the whole idea of games being independent, I just wish we had a different word. Maybe just small games. But then again, they're not all small games. In my case, my games are small. Um, but I think it's just become an overused term, and I don't know if it's very descriptive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I fully understand. I firmly believe, and I try to not use the word indie altogether within the
Mm-hmm.
industry. I actually
Yeah,
stopped.
I'm starting to do that.
Yeah, I stopped defining Serenity Forge as an indie studio about like 2 years ago, and I think it
Okay.
really helped us in like just placing ourselves in the industry, because then people
Yeah.
see us more of a company, as a startup, as someone who is here to create products and also find solutions for real world needs and all that. So I
Yeah.
don't know. For us, it definitely helped. For me, it helped with my personal identity. I can
Okay.
I can still define myself as an indie game dev just because I have been like I was a freshman in college making my own solo games before, so I can kind of like understand what that feels. But
Yeah.
unless if you're in that scenario, unless if you're a college kid, making games in your basement, I really don't feel like indie is an appropriate term for
Yeah.
anything.
Well, I mean, it's like if you're not a regular consumer of indie games, whenever you hear that term, you're gonna think, okay, so this game is artsy, it's silly, it's short, and like maybe it's something, maybe pixel art. Pixel art is like you constantly see that in indie games, and that's
Right.
just not the case with a lot of these new indie games coming out.
Yeah.
They're just games that are smaller in scale, and I think that's really really special with quote unquote indie games. I think what makes them really special is because they're so low budget, because they're such a small scale, the developers got to make sure that the gameplay mechanics and the hook of the game is perfect and really really special. Otherwise, you've just got a mediocre game altogether.
Right.
So there's a focus on gameplay, and making unique things. Like, didn't the whole concept for Portal start as an indie game, or at least an indie idea?
Yeah.
It started with a really small team, and then they took that really legit, like diamond in the rough concept, and turned it into this AAA title.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would
Yeah.
almost argue that the difference between an indie studio versus a non-indie studio is whether or not you care about your business outcome. Like if you're releasing your game and you don't care whether or not it makes any money at all, then I would say you're an indie developer. Otherwise, you're not.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Well, I think indie developers to remain sane need to have that posture.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like for me, like when I launched Pinstripe last year, it was like the hardest month of my life. It was insane because I didn't have expectations. Like I didn't think I'm gonna make $1 million, but I had this subconscious feeling that, please God, I hope I make some money here. You know, and I think that indie developers need to. They're almost required mentally and emotionally to make games just because they love them. Because, like you said, you just don't know how it's going to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of like the whole spirit of indie is to create art, right? In a way, create something that make people think or something like that. So if you are doing that, but then when you're releasing the game, you start thinking about, oh, would my game make money? Well, the problem is you never intended to make money while you're making that game. Why are you why are you slapping that new criteria for success on something that you didn't do during the past 4 or 5 years of making your game? So I feel like there's an identity crisis for a lot of these indie developers through that.
I think so. And dude, I'm just gonna say it. I hate hanging out on Facebook and seeing all the stupid memes about I'm an indie developer and I made $10 a month, that kind of stuff. I think it's really damaging to the indie. I just want to stop saying indie, but I don't know what else to say. But it's damaging to the indie mentality,
right?
Because it starts turning it into woe is me. I'm a exhausted indie developer who's not making any money. When in reality, we should be posting celebratory posts about how fun it is and how lucky we are that we get to even make games like this. This whole concept of sitting in your garage, which I'm in my garage right now, and making games, that was never really a thing. I mean, maybe it was for like Rareware when they were making Banjo-Kazooie, but like that really wasn't a thing in the AAA industry in like the 90s and the early 2000s. Like this is the coolest job in the world. So I don't want to complain about how much money I'm making or whatever, and I'm certainly guilty of that. But seeing these memes on Facebook, it's just kind of frustrating. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I know exactly what you mean. Those like indie game promo groups or whatever. Yeah, so
which I'm a part of, and I want to be a part of them, but I also want to encourage them to be more positive.
Right. Yeah. So like what I've personally found is I'm kind of split. Like I completely agree with you, but at the same time I want to just take a quick step back and look at I guess the best way to say it is like the socioeconomic situation, right, of these game developers. I think it's kind of crazy if you look at these people making these posts. They're usually like non-American, sometimes not even European, right? Like they're Asian, South American, African, like a Middle Eastern, like tons of different descents. And
that's awesome.
And it's like it's really cool that these people are going on Facebook, making fun of their own careers, and actually making video games. Like imagine this, but like 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago. It's like it would never happen for anyone from like China or something like that, because they just don't have that resource. So a part of me, I would say that I'm really glad that our industry has evolved so much and the barrier of entry is so low that anyone, like literally anyone, middle schoolers, high schoolers, can pick up Unity and start making their own games and start like identifying themselves as a game developer. And that to me, like that's the positive side of